Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Mercy of the God of War. Last episode of Book 1. Valentine's Day Special Heavy Black Heart Lover's Day. Lover's Day was perhaps one of the oldest celebrations in the Dragon Empire. The legend that was told over and over had seen many changes over the years, from the lovers being two humans or two dragons, whether they survived the tale or not. No one could tell which part of the empire was really implied either, or how old that tale actually was. It wasn't of any significance, and each year, many poets were happy to reinvent the tale to fit the modern era. The one thing that did not change, however, was the part of the male lover gifting a river of flowers to his lady, to conquer her love. This was the main point of the story, the one that had been embellished year after year to make all the ladies swoon to the idea of a man gifting them a flower on that one special day. There perhaps wasn't a real river, but the flowers couldn't be misinterpreted. As such, this tale gave a reason, every year, for hundreds of shop or stall owners to suddenly add flowers to the products sold. Lover's Day was the one day of the year that every woman in the kingdom would receive flowers, and as such, all men were expected to gift flowers. It could be to a woman they still courted, one they hoped to marry during the year, or one they had been with for decades. The best-sellers did not hesitate to find hundreds of reasons for any man to buy flowers on that day, promising a lifetime of love, success with their partner, or even more entertainment in their chambers. Even the past emperors had been subjected to this ancient tradition, despite the headache of gifting hundreds of flowers to hundreds of concubines while creating little to no jealousy between them. Thankfully, times had changed, and there would be much less trouble for the ruler of the Dragon Empire this year, for the emperor was now an empress. For once, the owner of the Golden Throne didn't have to worry about sending flowers to anyone, but instead, she would most likely have to receive an endless trail of those. Far from the issues of the imperial palace, in the north, a little village was also celebrating the custom. The usually quiet village was filled with stalls and customers on that day. No one seemed bothered by the cold, as all were flocking to the streets to enjoy the joys and delicacies of the little festival that was happening for Lover's Day. Of course, the inventive merchants of the Dragon Empire had found ways to dedicate this Lover's Day to more than flowers. Food, charms and dozens of other items were put forward in the name of love. Still, flowers were the prime product of the event, and the stalls filled with them were, allegedly, the most popular ones. As such, the florist lady at the end of a street was happily finishing to get paid by her 10th customer of the day, a man walking away with 3 bouquets, when the next one already approached, or more accurately ran to her. Father! This one! Perched on his toes, the young boy enthusiastically pointed at a large bunch of pink flowers, arranged in a heart shape in front of the stall. The old lady smiled at him. Oh, this young man has good tastes. Who is this for? A lovely young lady in your heart. Arriving behind him, another boy, whose striking physical resemblance to the first obviously made him the older brother, politely nodded and smiled at the merchant lady. We are looking for presents for our mother, madam. Oh, what a polite young man. Your mommy must be so proud of her boys. The 2 boys had dark brown hair, and a curious honey skin the old lady had never seen before. From their clothes, she could tell they were from a middle or upper class family. The cold winds of winter were already there in the North Village, and the Onyx Castle had its first layer of snow settled on its roofs, still visible from afar. The two boys both wore coats made from snow leopard fur, a very rare item for the creature was too dangerous to hunt. Even more intriguing, the older one had gorgeous, mysterious green eyes. The old woman smiled a bit more, as there was little doubt as to their real identity. "Father!" called the younger one again, visibly impatient. "This one." "Darson, your manners," protested his older brother. Darson, obviously more stubborn, ignored him and kept jumping up and down on his feet, his hands on the front of the stall. Despite wearing a large dark cloak over his head, their father couldn't be missed. His silhouette stood taller than anyone in the flow of customers filling the streets for the Lovers' Day. Many turned heads and quickly stepped away from his path, as he exhaled an aura of danger. "Good morning, my lord," said the old woman, slightly bowing to the man as he approached. As she raised her eyes, she finally saw him, his black eyes under the cloak. Any other child would have been very intimidated by this tall and large figure, but Darson and his brother weren't. Plus, loved in the man's arms, a third child was hidden under the large cloak. The little girl was absolutely lovely. She had long brown curls, the same striking green eyes as her older brother, and skin one shade lighter than that of her brothers. She was holding on to her father's clothes, herself wearing a very pretty green dress with a little cape of the same fur as her siblings. As her eyes met with the old lady, the woman smiled, and the young girl blushed before hiding her face in her dad's shoulder. "Darson, Cashin, have you picked one?" asked their father with his deep voice. "This one, father, this one!" shouted Darson, who kept jumping around. Cashin, however, approached his father, his eyes on his little sister. "Ceci, do you want to choose one too? For Mom?" The little girl perked up again at her brother's voice. Her eyes met with her dad's, and he gently let her down. She was just a bit smaller than Darson, but she had seemed smaller than that in her father's arms. Cashin gently took her hand, but she was the shyest of the trio, almost hiding behind him despite her green eyes curiously looking at all the flowers displayed. "Which ones do you want, Cecilia?" asked her father. The little green eyes were scrutinizing each batch of flowers, visibly very determined to make the right choice. No one else was coming to bother the little family on the stall that should have been full at this time. The impressive figure of their father was enough to convince anyone to make a cautious detour around them. "Father, this one!" insisted Darson. "Darson!" His father's voice resonated like a whip in the air, and the boy immediately sealed his lips. Cashin, too, had sent a little glare his brother's way, but Cecilia visibly didn't mind. Instead, her finger pointed at a large set of white flowers. "Oh, white lilies! That's a very good choice for your mommy, my darling, isn't it?" Cecilia blushed again, but turned her eyes towards her father, full of hope. "Pick some for yourself too," he said. Her green eyes grew larger, and immediately went back on the stall. One could guess her excitement as she bit her lower lip, her eyes going all over the stall again. Meanwhile, the war god gave some money to the old lady. The weight in her hand was obviously way too much than anything the children would pick already, but the old woman simply smiled. Instead, she took the flowers Darson had picked, some of the white lilies, and some branches full of green leaves to start arranging a bouquet. "How about you, young man?" she asked Cashin with a wink. Cashin glanced at the bouquet, and pointed at some little pink flowers. The old lady smiled, and added some of those to the bouquet. She stepped to the side to trim the branches, letting the three children bicker about which one Cecilia would choose. "Thank you for your patronage, my lord," she said softly to the war god. "I have been in this village for my whole life, and never have I ever seen our lands so prosperous, thanks to you and my lady." The war god didn't answer. There was no need, and the old woman, smiling softly while continuing to prepare that bouquet, didn't expect him to. "Father," Cecilia chose hers. The children came back, and Cecilia showed her choice, some big purple flowers. Cashin, too, showed a bunch of pink and white flowers. "We picked some for baby Kiara too," said Cecilia. "Our sister is too tiny. She won't care about the flowers," protested Darson with a frown. "It doesn't matter," said Cashin. "We should still pick some for her too." "Can we take some for the aunties?" asked Cecilia. "Take all the flowers you want, my darling," said the old woman. The lord of the land had already given her more than enough to buy the full stand anyway, so the more the children took, the sooner she would go home. However, it was easy to see how well raised those three were. They remained polite and carefully picked the prettiest flowers for the aunties they were talking about. For a while, this old merchant lady was happy to serve her young customers, arranging several little bouquets of flowers for them, the prettiest one being, of course, for their mother. A few minutes later, Cecilia was carrying her mother's bouquet and her own, while her brothers had to carry all the others. Even the war god had one in his hands, the one dedicated to their baby sister. The woman watched all of them as they left her stall after a quick goodbye. The older brother was gently talking to his little sister, who walked as close to her father as she could, visibly a bit shy in the crowd. Meanwhile, the other boy, energetic again, was running from one stall to another, pointing at things. This image of a family almost like any other lit up a warm feeling in that old lady's heart. For sure, this empire had bright days coming up. The four of them quietly left the main street, after Darson had convinced their father to buy some heart-shaped pastries filled with some sweet apple paste. The road leading to the Onyx castle had a thin layer of snow on it, but was completely empty. The children happily raced together to the castle, playing in the wide, empty area between the castle's grounds and the village. As soon as they caught sight of the gates, a large, dark creature popped up its head. "Cray!" exclaimed the little girl, excited. The black dragon jumped from over the gates, and the three children ran to the majestic creature. The dragon was so large, one of his paws was as big as the children. Still, it laid in the snow, waiting for them with its nostrils exuding thick clouds of steam, its tail waving the snow around. Cecilia ran until she hit the huge snout with a big laughter, and Darson, coming right after her, began climbing on top of the dragon. "You're going to damage the flowers, Darson!" yelled Cashin with a frown. Hearing her older brother's sentence, Cecilia patted Cray's snout, but walked back to take her dad's hand, and they walked inside the castle's ground together. The large dragon followed too, Darson still playing on its back. "Darson!" suddenly yelled a feminine voice. "I am not mending those clothes again, you little rascal. You've been warned." The woman who had just stepped out of the building was glaring at the large black dragon and the kid playing on its back, but her eyes softened as she went down on the trio. "Auntie Nebby!" exclaimed Cecilia. "Look! Oh, you got flowers, honey? They are so pretty." "Those are for you," said Cashin, giving her a bouquet of purple and orange flowers. Nebera took it, surprised, and smiled, brushing his hair gentle. "Oh, thank you Cashin, they are really pretty. Did you pick them for me?" "I picked two," proudly announced Cecilia. "Of course you did, sweetie, you are the prettiest flower of all." "Where is she?" asked Karen. "She just went into the gardens, my lord," nodded Nebera with a smile. "I think she can barely get rest with all the little ones." "Darson, come give the flowers," called Cashin. The boy finally got down, but the bouquets were already a bit damaged. Still, he proudly gave them to his Auntie Nebera. "This was for Auntie Pruny, and this one for Auntie Marion. You guys bought this much? Looks like we don't need husbands after all. Pruny can marry me," exclaimed Darson proudly. "You're a little too young for her, young man, but I will tell her," chuckled Nebera. "Now you all go and see your mother and give her those pretty flowers." She walked away carrying those for her colleagues, a smile on her lips. As soon as she disappeared back inside the building, the three children ran across the place. Darson leading, they opened the castle's doors and crossed the main hall to get to the other side, where their mother's gardens were. This was the most beautiful area of the castle. Despite the weather conditions, long, green trails of ivy were freely growing on the walls, and the floor was covered with fresh grass, free of any snow. The main reason was that the roof had been torn down, and made of several layers of sturdy glass. Hence, the whole room felt half open, but was still much warmer than the outside, as the sun gently shone over it. In those conditions, flowers were freely blooming all over, and the most organized area had plants, in little squares of soil, growing neatly into gorgeous green plants. In the middle of this improbable field, several little dragons were running around, following one woman and a little girl. As soon as the three siblings arrived, the dragons stopped their running around and turned their heads. "Kian!" Cashin called first. Immediately, the bigger of the four dragons ran over, his long silver body shining. After him, the three smaller dragons came too. One ran to Darson, and the two began wrestling in the grass. The third dragon, with a long, snake-like body of a purple shade, gently came at Cecilia's feet following her steps. The last one, by far the smallest, was sniffing the children and their father curiously, before it suddenly flapped its tiny wings to climb on Karen's shoulder. With its dark grey body and small eyes, it looked like a statue on the war god's shoulder. "Mommy!" exclaimed Cecilia, running to her mother first. The woman turned around, with a bright smile. The little girl that was hanging on to her dress suddenly let go, and ran past Cecilia in the opposite direction, to grab Cashin's cape. "Hi, Kira," he said, carrying her. "Have you been a good girl with mommy?" Meanwhile, Cecilia reached her mom at the same time as her father did. Cassandra smiled, and crouched down to hug her daughter. "Hello, my princess," she said, giving a kiss on the brown curls. "Have you been good for your dad? We got flowers for you, Mommy." She shyly showed the bouquet, almost too big for her, and immediately, her mother smiled even more. "Oh, they are so pretty. Thank you, my loves. We have some for Kira too," exclaimed Cashin, giving the smallest bouquet to his baby sister. "And even for the aunties." Cassandra smiled and stood back up, carrying Cecilia in her arms. Her husband approached, and they exchanged a long kiss. None of their children, visibly used to it, looked bothered. Cecilia played with some of her mom's brown curls that were hanging out of her bun. "I wondered where you had gone off to, so early," smiled Cassandra. "You took the children to the festival. I hoped you'd catch some sleep." "Thank you." They kissed again, and this time, all the little dragons, except for Darson's, ran back to Cassandra's feet, loudly making growls and cute squealing noises. Did you happen to bring food too?" Karen frowned at the unruly little creatures, and they all stepped back, immediately calming down. With a sigh, he then took out the half-empty pack of apple buns, and Cassandra quickly grabbed one. "Thank you. I love apple turnovers." "Kira, come and get one too, honey, otherwise they will eat it before you." Kira, aided by Cashin, came back to her mom and grabbed one of the little pastries, happily eating it despite all the baby dragons begging for food. "You guys should go hunt if you're so hungry," sighed Cassandra. "They have been stuck to me all morning long already." Just as she said that, a growl, much louder, resonated in the castle. All 4 baby dragons perked up, and quickly ran out of the room, towards the noise. Finally, Cassandra sighed. "Mom, I'm going hunting with the dragons too!" shouted Darson, running out of the room before his parents could stop him. "Isn't it too soon for him to go hunting?" she asked, a bit worried while letting Cecilia down. "He'll be fine," shrugged Karen, hugging his wife. Cassandra chuckled in his arms, and held him back for a long while. "Mommy, can we go and see the dragon egg?" asked Cecilia, pulling on her skirt. "Of course, baby, let's go see it." "I hope it's another little sister," whispered Cashin, making his mom chuckle. "We can't predict, Cashin, you know that, right?" smiled Cassandra. "But you said Grandma was right every time. Can we go ask her? We should get her some flowers, then. She'll be happy to see you. Let's go to the Diamond Palace when Darson and the dragons come back. And then, we can all dine at the Imperial Palace tonight. Your aunts will be happy to see you. Your baby cousin should be born soon, too." "A baby!" exclaimed Kira, excited. The children ran to see the egg a bit further inside the garden, leaving their parents finally alone. Cassandra sighed, and leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, while he wrapped his hands around her small but growing belly. "You guys didn't pick flowers for your mother or for the Empress?" she whispered with a smile. "They both get dozens every year anyway," grumbled her husband. "Still, they are your family. Let's go and visit them, today." Your mother must be lonely. I'm lonely too. I want more time alone with you. Cassandra chuckled, and turned around to put a quick kiss on his lips. Then we can leave the children to play with Cherian and your mother in the palace for the evening, and find somewhere to hide together. I'm sure we can find a place the little ones won't follow. We should enjoy it before Miss Sandra's baby is born. I promise to help her afterwards. The war god nodded, although he also sighed lightly. Cassandra smiled, and leaned against him, hugging her husband a bit more before the children would come to interrupt them again. The truth was, they were both very happy with their family growing bigger and bigger. Cassandra was just satisfied to have them all here, growing in peace and filling, once again, the Dragon Empire with some of those magnificent creatures. She didn't need more flowers, or any special attention. She had all the love she wanted right here, with her family. Book 2 of Mercy of the God of War. She was destined to love. He was born to hate. Princess Cecilia was born in the Dragon Empire, Prince Ashen in the Eastern Kingdom. With their nations separated by countless wars and endless hate for centuries, those two should have never met. However, destiny had other plans for them, and instead of another war, a new era comes, with unexpected twists and new dangers. With only her skills and a legendary war dragon by her side, Cecilia is sent as a prospective wife to the ruthless Ashen, the new ruler of the Eastern Kingdom, and now known as the White King. What will happen now that she is confined in his castle, at his mercy? Teaser. Do you like tea? She softly asked. Ah. Yes, please. The man was still stunned. The woman before him was a legend in this empire. She was adored like a living deity, perhaps more venerated than the Empress herself. Yet, from where he stood, just a couple of steps away from her in this tiny kitchen, she seemed like any ordinary woman, simply pouring tea with a soft, serene smile on her lips. She wasn't even especially beautiful. Her chestnut hair was held in a high and large ponytail, but still so long it fell down to her lower back. She wore no makeup, except perhaps some for her rose-tinted lips, and was actually a bit skinny. Her green dress wasn't any better than any of the servants here, and she only wore a couple of gold jewelry items, too. Moreover, he just couldn't get used to how pale her skin was. He'd heard of tribes, in the south, with white-colored skin, but he had never witnessed it himself. You look tired, she said, presenting him with a cup. It must have been a long journey. It was, Your Highness, said the old man, taking it. It took me over a month to come here, Your Highness. You may call me Cassandra, she chuckled. Your Highness is a bit too ceremonial for me. What should I call you? He stood a bit more upright, trying to forget how dirty he ought to look right now. He had no money to buy clean clothes and wore the same thing for days. Most people would have treated this old man like any beggar, with his messy beard and tired eyes. Yet, that woman didn't even show any sign of discomfort. This old man's name is Yasum, my lady. Yasum Himlayan, the wise. Well then, Yasum the wise, she repeated with a gentle smile. Please tell me about the Eastern Kingdom. The man's hands froze on the cup. He had followed Lady Cassandra, the water goddess, outside the throne room, a bit relieved to escape the arrogant Empress gaze, but he was following her with no idea of their real destination, or why she was even listening to his demands. She had first stopped by this small kitchen to make the tea. Seeing this living deity pouring tea in a kitchen didn't seem to surprise anyone, as all the servants coming in and out acted as if this was a regular thing that happened, quickly bowing before moving on with their tasks. Now, his cup still in his hands, he kept following her a bit helplessly as Cassandra was walking out, back to one of the large corridors of the palace. She was walking slowly, and clearly waiting to hear his answer. The man took a deep breath. "Our king is still young, Lady Cassandra. He is a brave young man, but he didn't become our king easily. After so many wars and battles, our people were famished, angry, and lost. It must have been hard." "Yes, my lady," sighed the old man. "Very much so. The civil war left many cities in ruins, and our roads stained with blood. We are struggling to put all our systems back into a functioning, let alone flourishing state. Commerce, finance, education, everything has been shattered, and we hope to build something better out of what was previously destroyed. But it is hard. Even 5 years after our young king rose to power, bandits are still roaming free, terrorizing our already traumatized citizens. Isn't it a bit strange that a king would look for a queen in a situation like this?" Despite Cassandra's gentle voice, the old man frowned. He knew this woman was probably too smart not to have understood already. "We are hoping to confirm our young king's power with a strong lady by his side, my lady." "A strong lady from the Dragon Empire." "A lady with a dragon," she whispered. The old man kept his head low. Of course, any sovereign would have been delighted to have the power of a legendary beast to assert their authority. The young king of the Eastern Kingdom, among all, was in dire need of such power. He was a bit more nervous now that the lady clearly knew some of the intentions behind his arrival here. He hadn't intended to hide it, but he did hope this wouldn't come to light so soon. Now he was probably looking like a desperate and shabby old man with 2 big demands. He stopped, his hands tight on the little cup. "Forgive me, Your Highness. You must think I'm a shameless man to have come here without even a decent present for your daughter, and make such a demand." Honestly speaking, everything he had heard previously about the Dragon Empire had made him think he was lucky to have kept his head on his shoulders this long. Yet, to his surprise, Lady Cassandra chuckled, and he dared look up. She was looking at him with that gentle gaze of hers. There was something invisible yet incredible about that woman. How young was she? Perhaps 15 or 20 years younger, at least. Yet, she was looking at him as if she had seen the whole world with those emerald eyes. Yasim had always considered himself a scholar and well-educated man, but he felt like a child in front of this young woman. She gently put her hand on his dirty shoulder. "I think you're a very brave man," she said. "And someone who deeply loves his country." Those few words hit Yasim hard. For a second, the man felt his throat tighten a bit, as if he was about to cry. In a few words, she had said everything that made his trip worthwhile. Even more than that, he felt like he was somewhat acknowledged. All the hardships he had endured to come here felt like a faraway, painful but distant memory. He was an old man who had thought this trip might be his last, and now that he was at his destination, he could find a bit of relief in the words of a stranger. "Thank you, my lady." Cassandra smiled and turned around, resuming walking. Wasn't she going to tell him they would refuse, and send him home? Where were they going now? Yesem had the faint thought she might have simply indulged this exhausted visitor, but now, he was reminiscing about her discussion with the Empress. Would the water goddess really be willing to give away one of her daughters? Yesem knew she had many children, but all those he had interrogated also said the imperial family was closer than ever in this generation. Did he mention which one? She asked softly. Which one? Which one of my daughters your king wanted to marry? Once again, he lost his confidence. What should he say? Should he lie, and try asking for any? Or should he simply pretend it was up for them to decide? If the water goddess knew the truth, she would probably not agree to this. Still, seeing how he was taking his time to answer, Cassandra let out a little sigh. I see. What did she see? Yesem was worried. Had he been exposed already? She was definitely a smart woman, how dare he lie to a living deity? Who was he to come all the way here and ask for a princess to go back with him? Cassandra didn't add anything, but she kept walking in the same direction. She didn't even look offended in any way, but as calm as she was before she had asked the question. Yesem kept following her, still stunned a bit more each second by this woman. All the servants were politely bowing and greeting her, and she'd reply with a smile or a polite answer, very differently from the arrogance he had been prepared for from the Dragon Empire's people. They finally arrived in what seemed like a large garden. A very, very large garden within the palace's walls. This empire's palace seemed as large as a small city from the outside, but Yesem had never imagined it would be so vast it could actually have such a grand garden, with even a lake. The place was lovely though, and the grass was very green despite the sun and heat. There were a few trees here and there, and under one of those, nearest to the lake, a group of young people were seated. Cassandra was walking towards the group, and Yesem immediately noticed the striking resemblance between her and some of those children. There were only 2 young women, circled by several younger children on the grass. From what Yesem could see, only one of the 2 young women had the same green eyes as the water goddess. She was young, but already a true beauty, captivating the young ones as she read them a book. She had long hair, just a shade darker than her mother's, and a darker, tanned skin, so pretty, a bronze color, almost golden under the sunlight. The contrast with her green eyes was absolutely striking, and beautiful. Her back against the tree, she was reading the book she had in her hands to the rest of the group. She had a very pleasant voice, almost as if she was singing, and all of the other children were visibly deeply involved in her reading, sitting with their bodies leaning towards her, or on their stomachs. And the young man ventured for days alone in that desert. He was thirsty, and the scorching heat was terrible to bear, burning his skin. Yet, he kept putting one foot in front of the other, bravely. He knew he had to go through this trial if he hoped to save his family. He spent many, many days in the desert, and could only rest a few hours, once the sun set and the gentle moon rose. Each night, the beautiful moon reminded him of his lover's beautiful white hair, and gave him courage again for the next day. So, each morning at sunrise, he rose like the sun, and resumed his long, long journey through the desert. And on the 15th day, said Cassandra, He found an oasis. All the children looked back, only noticing them now. "Mommy!" shouted two of the boys in the group. They suddenly stood up and ran to their mother. Neither of them looked older than 10 years old. The older one of the two arrived first, hugging his mom's legs, while the younger one grabbed her hand. "Mommy, Ceci was reading us a great story." "I know, I love that story." Yesem was baffled. There were a dozen children there, and from what he could see, half of them had light-colored skin. Not as white as the water goddess was, but definitely lighter than any other person's skin in the Dragon Empire. He was dying to ask if all 6 were her children, including the 2 young women. Aside from the older boy who had run to his mother, only one of the boys and one of the girls on the grass also had green eyes, all the other children's eyes were dark. But the fact that the one holding her hand had black eyes meant not all her children had inherited that feature. "Children, this is Yesem the Wise. He came from the Eastern Kingdom." All the children suddenly turned their eyes to him, and for a second, the old man felt a bit panicked. However, things didn't turn out at all like he had expected. Actually, the children with darker skin stood up and bowed politely before leaving the grounds. Were those children of servants? The ones with lighter skin that remained were obviously related to the imperial family, and they all wore purple or green clothing. "From the Eastern Kingdom," said the other young woman, sitting next to the one who was reading. "Really?" She bore a close resemblance to the girl next to her, but she had dark eyes, freckles on her nose, and her hair was cut at an unusual shoulder length. She exchanged a look with the young woman next to her. "Yes, my lady," replied Yesem, bowing. "This young woman is Tessa, my niece," said Cassandra. "Next to her is my oldest daughter, Cecilia. Then, there's my third-born daughter, Satara." Satara waved shyly at him, her big green eyes sparkling with interest. Next to her was a boy about the same age as her and, unlike his younger brothers, he hadn't moved and was frowning instead. "Mother, what does he want?" "This impolite child is my third son, Shannon. And those 2 are his little brothers, Cassane and Cepheus." Yesem kept nodding, wondering if it was important he remembered all those names. He was trying to do the math in his head, to understand how many children the princess had. With 5 boys and 3 girls, it meant, at least 8 children. "Where are Kira and Raisa?" she asked the 2 young women. "Raisa is with Mom," answered Tessa. "Kira was with us until an hour ago, I think." Cassandra sighed. "She probably ran off somewhere again." "Did she leave Kiki here?" The 2 girls exchanged a look. "I'm not sure," finally muttered Tessa. The princess mother didn't look too happy with that answer. To Yesem's surprise, she turned her eyes towards the sky, and the walls of the garden, as if she was looking around for something. "Cray!" she suddenly called loudly. Yesem froze, hearing a sudden loud noise 1 second later. Like an earthquake, as well as a gust of wind. He could tell something big was moving on the other side of that wall, something very, very big. A fright chilled the old man's body, as a shadow suddenly grew in front of them. Something dark, and incredibly huge. "There you are," sighed Cassandra. The gigantic black dragon stood with all its might, grabbing the top of that wall with its claws as if to support its humongous weight with it. Yesem was struck both by the magnificence and scary size of that creature. Its scales were shining like onyx under the sunlight, and its big red eyes were like ruby jewels, both shiny and frightening. It moved its body with surprising grace considering its size, and its movements were akin to a snake, or a feline. Its front paws landed one after another in the grass, and Yesem couldn't help but take a step back, as this creature was now in the garden, headed in their direction. "Cray!" exclaimed the two younger boys, running towards the beast. It was terrifying to see such young children run fearlessly towards the black dragon, but no one else seemed shocked. Instead, Cassandra crossed her arms, and the black dragon kept coming forward, its gigantic tail whipping the air around. Cray growled softly, a growl that echoed throughout the area and left Yesem wondering how big that mouth was, and those fangs. You let Kiara leave again, didn't you?" Cassandra scolded the dragon. "Did she feed you meat, Cray? You can't let the children trick you with treats each time." The black dragon laid down in front of the human woman, its head between its paws, and growled again, a short one this time. The two boys immediately began climbing to play on its back. Yesem was astonished. A huge creature like that, with such sharp claws, was lying like a house dog in front of the princess? No wonder that woman was considered a living deity. "You're supposed to watch all the children, you know," Cassandra added. "Were you napping?" Cray turned its head to the side, visibly ignoring her scolding. Yesem was truly unable to believe his eyes. Was it only an impression, or had the dragon purposely turned away to pout? Cassandra sighed, putting a hand on her hip. "Fine, I guess I can use the good old method then. Call the little ones, Cray, please." The dragon rose its head, this time glancing towards the lake, and let out a long, more high-pitched growl. Yesem had a hard time keeping his eyes off the majestic yet terrifying creature, but a myriad of little sounds coming from the lake convinced him to glance in that direction next. The water was moving, making small swirls at the surface. Fish? However, the little waves seemed too large to be the work of mere fish. "You should step away from my aunt, old man," said Tessa. Realizing she was talking to him, Yesem carefully distanced himself from the water goddess, who was walking towards the lake. All of a sudden, something jumped out of the water at full speed, splattering the grass around, and began running in the water goddess direction. For a second, Yesem mistook it for a gigantic snake, but it was way too fast. This thing obviously had limbs, 4 of them, and a pair of wings. Another suddenly jumped out of the water, of a different color, and another one after that. In a few seconds' time, no less than 4 little creatures with scales of various shiny colors were running on the grass at a scary speed to get to the princess. Yesem couldn't believe his own eyes. Those little ones were all tiny dragons. Baby dragons. "It's all right, my princess." The young girl kept crying helplessly in her mother's arms, despite her kind words, inconsolable. She was shaking despite being nestled in her mother's arms, her little arms tighter around her neck, crying tirelessly against her shoulder. Every time the thunder would drum above them, she'd scream in fear and cry more. Cassandra sighed, still caressing her baby's chestnut locks gently and patting her back. That heat storm wasn't going to stop anytime soon, sadly for the terrified little girl child. It was one of those big ones that they would get after several days of drought, when the air was hot and humid. The first rain in a long while was welcomed by the inhabitants, but for the little princess, this unseen event beforehand was a nightmare. Cassandra exchanged a glance with the woman seated by her side. Femera gave her a sorry glance, visibly also worried about the little girl. She still had on her lap the untouched remains of the dessert they had tried to feed the girl for comfort. Nothing could stop her cries, and they couldn't really blame her. At only 6 years old, all she could do was cry and seek refuge in her mom's familiar embrace. "Daddy!" she cried again. "He'll be back soon, dear," Femera said, her heart pinching at the little girl's big tears. "Daddy's gone to help the citizens," Cassandra explained gently. It wasn't enough to calm young Cecilia down. Another thunderbolt struck the sky at the window, and Cassandra covered her baby's ear. Behind her, Claude the golden dragon let out a faint growl, right at the same time as the thunder outside. Perhaps it was enough, because Cecilia didn't react to this one. Cassandra and Femera both glanced to the side and smiled at the older dragon. They had decided to stay in the place Cecilia considered the safest, which was the throne room, next to her grandfather's dragon. Cassandra's back was even lying against the golden scales, both she and Femera sitting on the cold marble floor rather than any of the chairs. Cecilia's aunt glanced to the side. Hidden against Claude's chest was Cecilia's own dragon, little Cease, probably trembling and curled up in a bundle of silver magenta scales, tucked as far as possible under the adult dragon's body. The two women raised their heads at the Empress entrance, while Claude barely looked up. Cherienne, Cecilia's aunt and the Dragon Empire's very own Empress, was walking in, drenched, with half a dozen servants running to pick up the pieces of armor she threw behind her, until she grabbed a towel out of their hands. She wiped her face with a groan, and tried to start drying her hair aggressively with it, the female servant behind her going pale at the thought of the mess it was going to be to untangle. "How's the situation outside?" Femera asked. "Mostly under control," Cherienne said. "2 trees fell in the middle of the road, the streets closest to the river should be safe from the rising waters, and a few who were injured were taken to the hospital." "Is she still crying?" Cassandra nodded. "She'll get used to it," sighed Cherienne. "What about the other 2 brats? Are they around? Weren't they with Karen?" Cassandra frowned. "He sent them both back a while ago." "What? They aren't home yet?" "I'm here." Arriving behind her, the young Prince Cashin walked in, also wet, his silver dragon immediately running ahead to curl up against Cassandra's legs with a satisfied, cute growl. He got another towel from the servants, and quickly dried himself off, walking up to his mother with a sigh. "Sorry, Mom, Aunties. We saw someone who was struggling with their chariot on the way back, so I stopped to help." "It's all right," smiled Cassandra, a bit proud of her 10-year-old. "What about Darson?" Cherienne frowned, putting her hands on her hips. "Where's he?" Cashin opened his mouth and closed it, visibly surprised. "He should have been home before me." Cassandra chuckled. Unlike Cecilia, her older brothers were quite fearless, even when it came to helping their father out in the middle of a storm. Femera, too, smiled, as Sherian's expression dropped. "You're telling me that wild brat is running free and unsupervised in my palace? Find him!" she shouted at the servants. "If you can't find a 7-year-old boy before this storm is over, I swear you'll be the first ones sorry about it." Cassandra was already feeling sorry for the servants, even if they were used to Sherian's temper. Finding her son in the large palace would be no easy task. Not only was the palace way too large, but Darson had already become a master at escaping the adults' surveillance. At best, they would find him when the boy actually caused a ruckus, which would already be far too late. While Sherian was still furious, Cashin walked up to his mom, his eyes on his little sister. "Are you still crying, Ceci? It's all right, the storm isn't so scary." This time, Cecilia turned her tears-soaked eyes towards her older brother. He sat on his knees by his mom's side, petting his little sister. "What about Kiera and Shannon?" asked Cashin, a bit worried about his younger siblings as well. "Miss Andra is looking after the younger ones," smiled Cassandra. "I believe they're all asleep." They had put the younger ones into one of the palace's guest rooms, which had thicker walls and a better sound barrier too. Cassandra wasn't too worried about the younger babies. They were used to loud noises like dragon growls, and they were still too young to tell the difference with a thunderstorm. They would probably sleep through the night along with Miss Sandra's daughters. Only Cecilia was at the right age to recognize this scary weather and be legitimately afraid. After another roll of thunder, a little squeak came from under Glahad's chest. The golden dragon growled, and laid down its head. "So that's where Cease is," scoffed Sherian. "See, you old, you've got another use from being a chair after all." Probably used to her temper, the old dragon didn't even flinch, its eyes half closed, more bothered about the younger baby dragon hiding underneath. "Daddy!" Cecilia cried again. Cassandra sighed, and held her daughter a bit tighter, kissing her forehead. She had calmed down a bit with her big brother's arrival, but she was still worried about her dad being out there. "He will be back soon, baby," Cassandra whispered. "Ceci," said Cashin, smiling at her. "Dad is the strongest. He only went out to beat that bad storm out there. I'm sure when he will be back he'll hug Ceci first." Cassandra smiled, as always proud of her oldest, very well-behaved son. Cashin had been an only child and motherless for 2 years, and now, he was the best older brother to all his siblings. He was incredibly mature for his age, and always trying to help out the best he could. All 4 of his younger siblings seemed to gravitate towards him. Even Shannon, who wasn't even a year old, seemed to like his big brother best. "I'm proud of you," she whispered to her son. Cashin, who didn't expect the sudden compliment from his mom, seemed surprised for a second, before putting on a big smile. Cassandra gently combed his wet hair back. Since he had come back, his little sister had calmed down a little, and was now crying silently against her mom's shoulder, her eyes on Cashin. Meanwhile, Sherian rolled her eyes, and turned around, the group of servants following her again. "Where are you going?" asked Femera. "To find that missing brat," she shouted, annoyed. "I'm not going to let your ridiculously strong boy wreck my palace a second time." Cassandra waited a few seconds after she was gone to chuckle. Femera too, had a faint smile on her lips. She's not going to be happy, she whispered. It's all right, chuckled Cassandra. As long as Lady Karine loves him, I'm pretty sure Sherian won't dare get too mad at my troublesome son. It's all material damages, anyway. It's not his fault he's excessively strong. He'll get better at controlling it when he's older. Let's hope so. Suddenly, the doors of the palace were banged open. They all turned their heads towards the large figure that walked in, his coat dripping with rainwater. Once again, the servants didn't dare approach, only picking up the large piece of clothing when he left it behind him. He got rid of his gloves the same way, and combed his wet hair back. Klahad the old dragon finally raised its head, glancing towards the man, while Cease, the baby dragon, peeked up too. Look who's back, Ceci, Cashin smiled. The little girl looked back just as the man was walking up to them. Daddy! She left her mom's arms to run across the room. Karen smiled, and put a knee down, welcoming his little girl just as she ran into his arms. She was crying and smiling at the same time, and he smiled too, standing back up carrying her. Cashin smiled, but took this little opportunity to go and hug his mom, who happily welcomed him. Her 10-year-old son was already so big, he'd soon be taller than her. Meanwhile, Cecilia was still small in her dad's strong arms. The thunder had finally stopped outside, only replaced by a pouring rain and hot winds, but it would all be gone by morning. Were you afraid? Karen whispered to his daughter. Cecilia nodded, her cheeks still wet. He smiled, and suddenly raised his hand to show her something. It was containing a small object, something unknown to the little girl. She frowned, and picked it up. It was a curious, cone-like, and voluptuous little object, with a hole. It smelled like salt, despite being so smooth and colorful. She was a bit confused. Her dad wiped her cheeks with his big thumbs. Daddy! What is it? It's a present from the wind, he said. From the wind? She frowned. Yes. When there's a big thunderstorm like this, the wind brings a lot of presents, from far away. So whenever there's a storm, Dad will bring you one, like this. Cecilia's big green eyes looked at her present, confused. It was the first time she had seen anything like this. Her mother stood and walked up to them. After giving a quick kiss to her husband, she then turned to her daughter, and gently turned the object in her hand. Listen to it. Cecilia frowned, confused again, but gently put the object's hole against her ear. The little girl's face frowned for a second, and then it lit up, ecstatic. Mommy, what is it? It's the sea, my princess. This is called a seashell, and you can hear the sea it came from, if you put it against your ear. The little girl was visibly amazed. Cashin too, came to listen to the seashell. Cassandra and Karen exchanged an accomplice's glance while she handed it to her older sibling. Perhaps thunderstorms wouldn't be so scary to their oldest daughter from now on. My lady. They turned their heads to find the imperial counselor, Evan, standing there in his bedroom bathrobe. He let out a faint sigh. I have to report, a wall of the palace has collapsed. A wall? How come? A landslide? It does not seem so, my lady. The roof above the wall held on, as well as the rest of the room it was adjacent to. If I may dare put my personal opinion forward, I believe this was more of a natural disaster originated by a young but very vandalism-prone young man. Cassandra and Karen exchanged another glance. Darson! Exclaimed Ceci, chuckling. Mom, did Darson just cause a lot of trouble again? Sighed Cashin. I'm sorry, my love. Could you go and get your brother before your aunt finds him? Asked Cassandra. I have a feeling he'd better fly north and far from our Empress' wrath. Cashin laughed, and put a quick kiss on his sister's cheek. I'll be right back, Ceci. She waved goodbye as he and his dragon ran out of the throne room. Let's all go home, suddenly said Karen. Really? He nodded, putting his other arm around his wife's waist. Cassandra smiled, and glanced at her daughter. You heard your dad, my princess? We're flying home at dawn. Can we go see Grandma? We'll make a stop at her palace. But first, you need to catch some sleep, my princess. Cecilia nodded, and leaned against her dad's chest, curling up against his warm skin. She visibly had no intention to leave his strong arm, but it was all right. Soon after she closed her eyes, the little girl had fallen asleep, breathing slowly. Cassandra gently put a strand of her hair behind her ear. Femera, do you want to come with us? The woman, who had young dragon Cease on her lap, shook her head with a smile, without surprise. She never, ever left the palace. Cassandra couldn't comprehend why her sister-in-law had decided to seclude herself in this place, but she respected her wish. They exchanged a simple smile. Please greet Lady Karine in my stead, she simply said. We will. Karen turned around, carrying his daughter, and holding her mother's hand. Cease chirped cutely and ran to follow. Left behind, Femera simply smiled at the retreating figures of the family, while Glahad moved its large head under her hand to be pet. Her fingers gently caressed the golden scales. I know, Glahad, she said. I'll miss them too. Until the next time. Now, shall we prepare ourselves for an angry empress? Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.